When you think of what Jesus may look like, you may think of a tall Caucasian man with light flowing brown hair. That's the image typically shown in Bibles, paintings, statues, and in movies and on TV throughout the world.
A fascinating letter has been found, written by Aurelius Lentulus, a Roman who saw Jesus Christ with his own eyes. Lentulus wrote many letters to Caesar in Rome, and in one of them, he described Jesus in great detail.
Well, the best thing Paul gives us is that he was an eyewitness to the eyewitnesses.
This letter paints a vivid picture of what Jesus looked like and how he carried himself. What did Lentulus really see that made him write to Caesar? Let us explore the details of this remarkable description that is making the entire Catholic Church nervous. The true face of Jesus. All around the world, we see pictures and paintings of Jesus depicted as a Caucasian man. However, the most famous image of Jesus, created by Warner Sallman in 1940, shows him with light eyes and is called Head of Christ. This image is incredibly popular and has been used on various items like prayer cards, stained glass, oil paintings, calendars, hymnals, and even nightlights. Sallman, who used to make art for advertisements, managed to spread this picture all over the world by working with two big Christian publishing companies, one for Protestants and the other for Catholics. His work reflects a long-standing tradition where white Europeans made and shared images of Christ that look like themselves. But let's talk more about the real Jesus. Historically, Jesus probably looked like most people from Galilee during the first century, with brown eyes and skin. But no one really knows for sure what he looked like because there are no pictures of him from his lifetime. While the Old Testament talks about King Saul and David being tall and good-looking, it doesn't say much about Jesus' looks. Even the descriptions that exist are a bit contradictory. For instance, the Old Testament prophet Isaiah mentions that the Savior to come didn't look majestic or beautiful, but the book of Psalms says he was fairer than the children of men, meaning he was good-looking. Here's where it gets interesting with a letter from a Roman guy named Publius Lentulus, which gives a detailed description of Jesus. Back then, people wrote a lot of letters, and we have several of them. For example, Pontius Pilate, who was the governor of the region now known as Israel-Palestine, wrote regularly to Caesar in Rome. Pilate had a chance to see Jesus often from his balcony. We also have a letter from the high priest Gamaliel, who taught the apostle Paul and later became a believer in Jesus after his resurrection. This letter about Jesus is kept in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. The only physical description we have of Jesus comes from a letter by Lentulus, who was the Roman consul to the Emperor Tiberius. This letter was found in a monastery with other old documents. It dates back to the 12th year of Emperor Tiberius's rule. Historical records confirm that Lentulus was in Judea during Jesus' trial and crucifixion. His family is even mentioned by the Jewish historian Josephus in his book Antiquities of the Jews. However, there's some debate among scholars about whether this letter is genuine. In his letter to Emperor Tiberius, Lentulus describes Jesus as having a noble and lively appearance, with fair and slightly wavy hair, black eyebrows that curved strongly, deep blue eyes that looked very expressive, and a face that showed no bitterness or arrogance. Instead, his expression was one of wisdom, kindness, and gentleness. He had a long nose, an almost blonde beard that wasn't too long, and long hair that had never been cut. His neck was slightly bent, making him look humble and approachable. His tanned face matched the color of ripe corn and looked well-balanced. Lentulus's letter is quite detailed. He talks about Jesus' amazing teachings, the miracles he performed, and many other incredible things about him. He wrote to the Roman Senate describing Jesus as a man of great influence, known as the prophet of truth by non-Jews, and called the Son of God by his followers. Jesus had the power to bring people back to life and cure illnesses. He was described as a man of average height and pleasant appearance, with a dignified look that made people both love and respect him. His hair was like the color of an unripe hazelnut, smooth almost to his ears, but from there it turned into darker, shiny curls that fell over his shoulders. These descriptions from Lentulus provide a rare glimpse into how Jesus might have looked and the impact he had on those around him. It's fascinating to think about how different these accounts are from the typical images we see of Jesus today. The letter not only captures his physical traits, but also highlights his spiritual presence and the profound effect he had on people, shaping not just a historical view of Jesus, but also a deeply personal one. These old descriptions really make us start to wonder just how much of what we know about Jesus is based on truth. How old art shapes Jesus. It's important to realize how these images and descriptions from long ago still influence our understanding of historical figures like Jesus. They remind us that our perceptions are often shaped by the cultures and times we live in, and what we see in art or read in texts isn't always a true reflection of the past. Discussing these different views and exploring these old texts can help us get a fuller picture of historical figures, providing more depth to our understanding of history. He styled his hair down the middle, a common look among the Nazarenes, and his forehead was smooth, reflecting a serene attitude. His face was free of wrinkles or spots, enhanced by a natural, healthy color. His facial features, like his nose and mouth, were faultless. His beard matched the color of his hair, trimmed to a moderate length with a slight curl at the end. His expression was straightforward yet showed maturity, and his eyes, a distinct gray, held a calm clarity. When he needed to correct someone, his presence was formidable. But when giving advice, he came across as gentle and endearing. He was generally serious, yet showed a cheerful side. Although he often cried, he was never seen laughing. He stood tall and straight, with well-formed hands and arms. In conversations, he was serious, kept to himself, and showed great modesty, truly embodying the prophetic description of being more beautiful than any man. This description closely matches the traditional portraits that have been created over time, likely influenced by direct observations. The Greeks, too, meticulously detail the appearances of key religious figures like the apostles and the Virgin Mary, just as they did with their celebrated heroes from the tales of Troy. Fascinatingly, when we merge the details from Lentulus's letter with the data from the Shroud of Turin, we can piece together a more complete physical depiction of Christ. Professor Giovanni Judica Cordelia, a scholar of the Shroud of Turin with a background in forensic medicine, provided a thorough interpretation based on the shroud's impressions. He described the figure of Christ as being of striking beauty and notable height, standing at about 6 feet with a body that was both athletic and proportionate. The shroud, despite its damage, still reveals a face that was soft and gentle, elongated, with a broad, straight forehead. His nose was straight, with a slight downward turn at the tip, and his cheeks were full and somewhat protruding. Based on detailed measurements, it is evident that Christ was physically superior to the average man. Further analysis of his facial features indicates a cranial capacity of 1575 cc, placing him in a category suggesting significant brain size, with an estimated brain weight of 1492 grams, indicative of a person of exceptional intelligence. The views on Jesus' appearance have varied across the ages. Early Christian thinkers, like Justin Martyr and Origen, referred to biblical texts to discuss his physical traits. Isaiah's writing suggested that Jesus did not display any grandeur or beauty, appearing plain compared to other men. However, other scriptures like Psalm 45 presented him as the most handsome of men. This contradiction implies that people's views on Jesus' appearance might have been influenced by their personal spiritual experiences. St. Augustine argued that the actual look of Jesus is less important to faith. What matters is acknowledging his humanity. He believed that while many might imagine Jesus differently, he had only one true physical form. This idea aligns with Cyril of Jerusalem's teachings in the 4th century, who explained that Jesus presented himself differently according to the needs of individuals, as a source of joy, a gateway, a mediator, or even as a sacrificial lamb for sinners. He emphasized that Jesus adapted to people's needs while maintaining his divine nature and sonship. Let's dig a bit deeper into how those who lived closer to Jesus' time might have actually seen him, blending historical facts with personal beliefs. Many faces of Jesus. These varied interpretations show us a multifaceted image of Jesus, not just as a historical figure, but as someone deeply integrated into the personal and spiritual lives of those around him. The array of descriptions from historical, biblical, and scholarly sources paints a picture of a figure who is as diverse in his roles as he is in his representations. This diversity not only underscores the complexity of his legacy, but also reflects the personal connections people have made with him over centuries. Each description and role that Jesus has been given serves to meet the specific needs, beliefs, and circumstances of individuals, showcasing his ability to relate uniquely and personally to each person. This personalized view of Jesus, echoed through ancient descriptions and scholarly interpretations, helps us appreciate the wide-ranging impact he has had on various cultures and individuals throughout history. It also emphasizes that understanding Jesus' appearance is less about physical details and more about recognizing the profound influence he has on individuals' lives. This multifaceted approach to understanding Jesus allows us to see how he has been perceived as everything from a humble servant to a regal figure, each portrayal aimed at bringing a deeper understanding of his life and teachings to the people of that time and beyond. Exploring these diverse perspectives provides a richer understanding of how Jesus has been viewed across different eras and cultures. It highlights the adaptability of his image to serve different purposes, whether for guidance, comfort, or inspiration. The evolving depictions of Jesus throughout history illustrate not only the adaptability of religious iconography, but also the deep personal connection that people feel towards him. This connection, fostered through various interpretations and teachings, offers a glimpse into the enduring relevance and influence of Jesus in people's lives, transcending the simple depiction of his physical form to embrace a broader, more impactful vision of his presence and role in the world. It's really interesting how images of Jesus started off showing him as a young, radiant guy, kind of like the god Apollo. But then things changed big time in the 4th century when Emperor Constantine made Christianity an official religion. Suddenly, all the pictures of Jesus started to show him as an older guy with a beard, which was a complete turnaround from those earlier, youthful depictions. Now here's a cool bit of trivia. The very first images that people thought actually looked like Jesus were said to be created without any human touching them. These are known as archaeology, which basically means not made by human hands. This idea came about in the 7th century, and there's a story behind it. It goes like this. Jesus healed King Abgar of Edessa, which is now in Turkey, just by sending him a miraculous image of his face. Western Christianity has its own similar story from between the 11th and 14th centuries. It's about how Jesus, just before he was crucified, left an image of his face on the veil of Saint Veronica, which then became known as the Volto Santo, or Holy Face. These images, along with a few other sacred relics, really set the standard for what people think Jesus looked like, at least in the world of art and history. These treasured relics made sure the image of Jesus as a bearded man with dark, shoulder-length hair stuck around. When the Renaissance rolled around, European artists started blending traditional religious icons with their own style of portrait painting. They did this for many reasons, maybe to feel closer to the human side of Jesus' suffering, or just to show off their skills as artists. For example, Antonello da Messina, a 15th century painter from Sicily, made these personal, intimate paintings of a suffering Jesus that looked a lot like regular portraits of people back then. He even signed his works with Antonello da Messina painted me. Now we'll explore how these images of Jesus were preserved, honored, and sometimes questioned as the years went by, each adding a new layer to our understanding. Powerful relics keep Jesus alive. Albrecht Dürer, a German artist from the 16th century, also mixed the sacred with his own image. In a famous self-portrait from 1500, he posed straight on like an icon, with a beard and fancy hair that made him look a lot like the traditional images of Christ. His use of the initials AD was a clever touch, because it could stand for both his own name, Albrecht Dürer, and Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. This kind of artistic expression wasn't just happening in Europe, though. Art from the 16th and 17th centuries often showed Jesus with people from different ethnic backgrounds, like Ethiopians and Indians, even though the image of Jesus often kept those European traits, influenced by European colonization and trade. This European influence is pretty clear in a painting called Adoration of the Magi by the Italian artist Andrea Manna from 1505. It features 3 wise men from Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, each bringing fancy gifts that were popular imports at the time. Despite these diverse figures, Jesus is depicted with light skin and blue eyes, suggesting European features, which is a bit odd considering he was Middle Eastern. The painting even has fake Hebrew writing on it, which shows a kind of complex relationship with the Jewish background of Jesus' family. But you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what Jesus looked like. What's really important is the connection that believers have with him. Every person who has been baptized in his name has something pretty special to look forward to. The promise that when our time on earth is up, we'll get to meet Jesus face to face in the heavenly court. That meeting in a place beyond all our understanding of time and space might show us a side of Jesus that we could never have pictured in our minds. Christian relics have always been a big deal in the lives of believers. Going way back in history, these objects, linked to Jesus Christ and various saints, are highly valued because they're tied to important religious events and are thought to hold spiritual power. One of the top relics out there is the true cross. That's the cross they say Jesus was crucified on. It's been a major symbol in Christianity ever since the 300s, when St. Helena, who was Constantine the Great's mom, supposedly found it. Pieces of this cross ended up all over Europe, and loads of churches claim they've got a piece of it. There's been a lot of debate about whether all these pieces could really all come from one cross, but that hasn't stopped people from cherishing them. Then there's the crown of thorns, the crown they say was put on Jesus' head when he was suffering before his death. This crown story is pretty wild, with the main part kept in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris until it was nearly lost in a fire in 2019. Like the true cross, people debate if it's the real deal, but it still stands as a strong symbol of what Jesus went through. Another big one is the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. Legend has it that this spear was used to stab Jesus during his crucifixion. There are a few different places that claim they have the real spear, and the tales around it are pretty fascinating, mixing awe with mythical stories. Probably the most famous and most controversial relic is the Shroud of Turin. This linen cloth has got an image of a man who looks like he was crucified, which many think might actually be Jesus' burial shroud. In 1988, they did some tests that suggested it might be from medieval times, not from when Jesus was around, which stirred up a lot of debate. Still, the shroud has a ton of people who revere it and study it, hoping it might really be a trace of Jesus. Another interesting relic is the Holy Robe, believed to be the robe Jesus wore before he was crucified. It's said that St. Helena found it, and it's now kept in Trier, Germany. The robe's history is a bit murky, but it's been in Trier since around the 12th century and gets shown to the public now and then, drawing lots of visitors. The Veil of Veronica is another cool piece. The story goes that Veronica gave Jesus her veil to wipe his face when he was on his way to be crucified, and his face left an imprint on it. A few different churches claim they have this veil, and one of the most notable ones is kept in the Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica.
One is the letter from Publius Lentulus to the Roman Senate about Jesus Christ, found during the Middle Ages. The other is the mention of Jesus by the well-known Jewish historian Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews. What hidden insights might these ancient texts reveal? Let us explore these intriguing discoveries from the past that will reshape religion for the years to come. The old letter that describes Jesus. Let's kick things off by heading back to Wikipedia to check out the established view on the Lentulus letter. This document, much like the intriguing Shroud of Turin, first popped up around 1460 and got its initial printing in Germany in Ludolf of Saxony's The Life of Christ, and it also appears in the introduction to St. Ambrose's writings. The Jena manuscript reveals that this letter was discovered in 1421 by a guy named Giacomo from the Colonna family within an old Roman manuscript that was sent over from Constantinople to Rome. It's believed to have been written originally in Greek and then translated into Latin sometime during the 13th or 14th century. On the other hand, a scholar from the 19th century named Fred thought he could trace the letter back to the days of Tiberius Caesar. But this idea isn't really taken seriously by today's experts. The letter is often thought to be not genuine for a few solid reasons. First off, no one known to have governed Jerusalem or Judea was named Lentulus. Also, the way the letter addresses the Senate isn't how a Roman governor would typically speak. However, it's worth noting that The Deeds of the Divine Augustus, a book by the Roman Emperor Augustus, mentions a Lentulus who was elected as a Roman consul during his rule, which ended in 14 AD. So, it seems there really was a Lentulus around at some point, just not quite in this context. Let's dig into another reason why many think the letter might not be legit. The Roman author of the letter used terms like prophet of truth, son of man, or Jesus Christ, which are deeply rooted in Hebrew culture, with the last one coming straight from the New Testament. Now, what does the letter itself say about Jesus? Well, it gives us both a visual and a character sketch. It starts off pretty straightforward. Lentulus, the governor of the Jerusalemites, to the Roman Senate and people, greetings. It paints a picture of Jesus as a powerful and moral figure, known to the people as the prophet of truth, and to his close circle as the Son of God. He's credited with bringing people back to life and healing sicknesses. Physically, he's described as a man of average height, but with a presence that commands both respect and affection. His hair is the color of ripe hazelnut, not straight, but wavy, and curled at the ends, with a shiny bluish tint that cascades over his shoulders in a style typical of the Nazarenes. His face is smooth and welcoming, with a healthy hint of red, and his features, like his nose and mouth, are perfectly shaped. He sports a well-kept beard that matches his hair color and is trimmed at the chin. His overall look is straightforward yet mature, his eyes a clear blue-gray that reflect his stern yet gentle nature. He's stern when he needs to be, kind in his guidance, and maintains a light-hearted demeanor without being silly. He's known more for tears than laughter, stands tall, and his movements, especially his arms and hands, are graceful. His way of speaking is serious, not too frequent, and humble. According to the letter, he's the most handsome of men. This version of Jesus really stands out and lines up with what's been described in Gifts of Heaven, and matches with other historical accounts from notable figures like the high priest Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, Nero Claudius Caesar, and John Damascene, as found in the Book of Painters of Mount Athos. These accounts are further supported by descriptions in the archaeological volume and in correspondences between Jesus and Abgarus, showing a consistent image of Jesus across various ancient writings. Looking at another point on WikiWand, there's a mention in the Deeds of Augustus about Publius Lentulus being elected as a Roman consul during the reign of Augustus, confirmed by a record on the Internet Archive that highlights his role alongside Nero. Although the details are scant and the exact timing is a bit fuzzy, this info adds another piece to the historical backdrop of the letter's authenticity debate. Next, let's explore how the Lentulus letter has been viewed over the years and what it reveals about its true background. The Church's view on the Lentulus letter. The Catholic Church straightforwardly classifies the Lentulus letter as ambiguous, stating outright that Publius Lentulus, supposedly the governor of Judea before Pontius Pilate, was entirely made up. This conclusion is supported by the absence of any mention of Lentulus in the official records or books written by Emperor Augustus. The letter itself consistently opens with, Lentulus, the governor of the Jerusalemites, to the Roman Senate and people, greetings, a format very similar to entries found on Wikipedia. Additionally, the Catholic Encyclopedia repeats this claim, insisting that Publius Lentulus is a fictional character historically placed before Pontius Pilate. The body of the letter doesn't vary much across different sources, echoing the same introduction. Lentulus, the governor of the Jerusalemites, to the Roman Senate and people, greetings. This aligns closely with what's documented on Wikipedia. On the evangelical side, voices loudly debunk the depiction of Jesus in the letter, calling it a complete fabrication. Brandon Wart, commenting on this topic, highlights that the renowned Christian scholar Dr. Edgar J. Goodspeed also debunked the letter. Dr. Goodspeed, a respected theologian and an expert in Greek and the New Testament, dismissed the archaeological volume quite succinctly. In his important book, Modern Apocrypha, he discusses 16 well-known biblical hoaxes, including this description of Jesus. He suggests that although the letter appears in medieval manuscripts, it likely dates from the 13th century, but was unknown to the early Christian community and doesn't hold any genuine merit regarding Jesus' physical appearance. Dr. Goodspeed's critical view extends to many ancient Christian texts, acknowledging that we only have a fraction of what was produced during Christian antiquity. Much remains hidden in private collections like the Vatican's archives, which are not accessible to the public or even to many scholars. Dr. Goodspeed is often revered as a nearly infallible authority, akin to a divine representative due to his thorough dismissals of these texts. Some critiques point out that no tangible evidence of the Lentulus letter exists. Inquiries into significant libraries, including the Congressional Library in Washington, D.C., confirm they hold no such documents. Another profound discussion comes from the academic book White Jesus and the Publius Lentulus letter by Edward G. Bloom and Paul Harvey, published by the University of North Carolina Press. In their work titled The Color of Christ, the Son of God and the Saga of Race in America, they critically assess the portrayal of Jesus as a white man, arguing that this image has been exploited to justify egregious acts of racial oppression and also to champion the cause of civil rights. They criticize the wrongful assignment of divine attributes based on race by some proponents of Christianity. For a deeper exploration, the book 12 Hours is recommended, found on the Lord's website and the Internet Archive under the New Revelation of Jesus Christ. This series, now available in English, underscores Jesus' message of universal love that transcends racial and cultural boundaries. It vehemently opposes the actions of insincere Christians who discriminate against others, based on differences in skin color, culture, or religion, promoting a message that all humans are divine beings, children of God. This stands in stark contrast to those who misuse Christian teachings for divisive ends. Revisiting the Lentulus letter, it's noted that it might date back anywhere between the 11th and 15th centuries, though a more specific suggestion points to the 13th century, offering a wider time frame for its origin. Curiously, the letter mentions its author as a Roman proconsul rather than a governor, adding another layer of historical inaccuracy. There's also mention of a Roman consul in the deeds of Augustus, but this isn't directly linked to the discussions around the Lentulus letter, further complicating its historical standing. Historically, before the Civil War, it was widely accepted that the Lentulus letter was a forgery. Figures like Ezra Stiles, president of Yale University, recognized and admitted this openly. Although the Bible does not describe Jesus' appearance, the falseness of the letter had been acknowledged. However, after the Civil War, perceptions shifted as some white Americans began to treat the letter's description as factual, using it to construct a racialized image of Jesus that allegedly validated white superiority. This change in belief showcases the complex interaction between historical records and evolving social values, questioning the integrity of historical and scientific exploration. Moving forward, we'll see how the image of Jesus has changed over time and how these views have influenced beliefs. Ancient art's depiction of Jesus. Earlier discussions about how Jesus looked have brought us back to some very old pieces of art. One particular image from the 4th century shows Jesus with light skin, which is a common theme in many of the earliest depictions, where he's sometimes even shown with blonde hair. This shows that the idea of Jesus being white didn't start in America after the Civil War. Instead, this was an image that had been around for a very long time. But here's something interesting. During the Civil Rights Movement, people started to question this portrayal. They began to argue that, considering he was from the Middle East over 2,000 years ago, it didn't make sense for Jesus to be white. This wasn't just about what people felt. They looked at historical artworks and even examined old skulls from Israel to back up their point. Despite this shift in thinking, some people still hold on to the old ways of seeing Jesus, influenced by historical letters that describe him in a way that fits this outdated image. When it comes to the more technical debates about these old letters and how Jesus was referred to during his life, things get even more complicated. For example, it seems that during his lifetime, Jesus wasn't called Christ or Jesus Christ. This is something I found while reading the Great Gospel of John, which is a huge book you can find online for free. It's split into 25 parts, and right from the first one, it refers to Jesus as Christ, which lines up with what's in the Bible and other religious texts. One story from this book talks about John the Baptist. It shows that the book was likely written after Jesus died because it has John talking about Jesus' life and mission. He was one of Jesus' close followers and spent 3 years learning from him. In this book, John is quoted directly, giving a first-hand account of things as they happened, not just as they were remembered later. He talks about his role in preparing people for Jesus, using water baptism as a symbol of cleaning the soul, ready for Jesus' teachings. He also speaks about how people often miss what's right in front of them because they're spiritually blind. In another part of the book, there's a detailed story about a woman at a well, a tale that's also found in the Bible. Her name is Arel, and through her story, Jesus' teachings are explored deeply. The book describes a conversation where Jesus connects his teachings to those of King David, emphasizing themes like truth, justice, and spiritual desire. The people who heard him started to see the links between his words and the prophecies about the Messiah, the promised Savior whom many were waiting for. This long text, the Great Gospel of John, doesn't just repeat what's in the Bible. It expands on it, adding layers of conversation and detail that make the events and teachings clearer and more engaging. For instance, it includes a big speech that Jesus gave, known as the Sermon on the Mount, and explains it in simple terms so everyone can understand, not just those who are deeply religious. Through all these chapters and stories, the book tries to connect Jesus to the prophecies that came before him, showing that he fits into a much larger story of faith and salvation that people have been following for centuries. It's a way of making sense of his life and work, seeing him as a continuation of a long line of spiritual leaders. In discussing these texts and ideas, we're not just learning about history, we're also seeing how people's understanding of someone like Jesus can change over time. The way he's been shown in art and talked about in books reflects the times and places those works came from. But by looking back with a critical eye, people today can get a fuller picture of who Jesus might really have been and what his life and message were all about. This conversation isn't just for scholars or religious people, it's for anyone interested in how history and culture come together, showing us not just who someone was, but also how they've been remembered and why that matters. It's about connecting with the past in a way that's meaningful today, finding relevance in old stories and seeing how they still speak to us now. Now, we'll connect old writings with today's ideas about who Jesus was and what his life meant. When a priest saw a miracle. So while we might start with a simple question about what Jesus looked like, it quickly grows into a much larger discussion about faith, history, and how we understand our place in a story that's been unfolding for thousands of years. It's a conversation that can be as deep and rich as any of the texts we read or the artworks we study, filled with insights and revelations that challenge us to think differently about the world and our role in it. In chapter 46 of the Great Gospel of John, titled Return at Caesarea, Cleansing of a Leper, a significant event is depicted that profoundly impacts a high priest. This chapter describes a miraculous healing performed by Jesus, which convinces the high priest of Jesus' divine nature. Initially skeptical, the priest witnesses Jesus cure a man whose condition was so severe that it seemed beyond hope, much like trying to empty a vast river with a small bucket would seem impossible. But when Jesus heals the man with just a few words, the priest is so moved that he immediately acknowledges Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God made flesh. This realization is powerful because at the time, not even all of Jesus' close followers had fully grasped his divine identity. This moment is pivotal because it underscores that the title Christ was indeed used during Jesus' life, contradicting the idea that it was a later addition to the story of Jesus. The text aims to show that Jesus' actions and words were in line with the prophecies and expectations of a Messiah, setting the groundwork for the future of Christianity. On the topic of historical documents and their authenticity, the discussion often turns to a controversial letter attributed to Publius Lentulus. Many experts believe this letter to be a forgery. However, historical records like the Deeds of the Divine Augustus mention a Publius Lentulus as a Roman consul, adding layers to the debate. This letter's descriptions of Jesus match those found in other ancient texts, which keeps the conversation about its legitimacy alive. Moreover, Flavius Josephus, a historian from the 1st century, also mentions Jesus in his work, The Antiquities of the Jews. He refers to Jesus in what is known as the Testimonium Flavianum, describing him as a wise man who performed astonishing deeds and was recognized as the Messiah. Another mention in the same work refers to Jesus' brother James, further solidifying historical references to Jesus as the Christ. These references are crucial as they provide a link between the scriptural accounts of Jesus and historical acknowledgments of his life and role as the Messiah. The authenticity of the Testimonium Flavianum is heavily debated among scholars. Views on it range from seeing it as entirely genuine to believing it is completely fabricated, or that it was originally written by Josephus but later altered by Christians to fit their theological views. This debate is important because it touches on the reliability of historical documents and the intentions behind them. Modern scholarship often examines these texts critically, trying to determine what parts may have been added later and what parts are likely original, suggesting that Josephus might have indeed written about Jesus without any intention to promote Christian beliefs. This scholarly debate illustrates the complexities involved in interpreting historical texts related to significant figures like Jesus. It's not just about what the texts say, but also about understanding the context in which they were written and the motivations of their authors. Each piece of historical evidence, from Roman records to Jewish historical texts, adds depth to our understanding of Jesus' impact, both as a historical figure and a theological icon. The discussions around the letter of Publius Lentulus and the writings of Josephus enrich our understanding of the past. They challenge us to think critically about the sources of our historical knowledge and the ways in which cultural and religious biases can influence the recording of history. These debates show how the interpretation of ancient texts can inform or challenge our current understanding of historical events and figures. Could these ancient texts hold long-lost truths about Jesus? Or are they just cleverly crafted myths from history? What do you believe? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.